In the heart of London, a scene of ordinary cruelty was about to transform into extraordinary justice. The blonde cashier at Harrison's supermarket laughed cruelly while humiliating a homeless man who wanted to buy bread. "You don't look like you can afford even the crumbs," she shouted, drawing the stares of all customers. But that disheveled man hid a devastating secret. He was James Harrison, the billionaire owner of the chain, disguised to test his staff. When the girl called security to throw him out, James noticed something that froze his blood. Around her neck, she wore a golden pendant of a lion, identical to his brother William's, who died 25 years earlier after being expelled from a supermarket. What James would discover in the following hours would reveal a network of murders, family betrayals, and corruption that had its roots precisely in that tragic night a quarter of a century ago. And the truth was more terrible than any nightmare. The gray November dawn of 2024 found James Harrison before the mirror of his Kensington penthouse, preparing for the transformation he knew by heart. At 52, owner of 47 supermarkets, and with a fortune of over £500 million, he was about to become invisible. The metamorphosis required surgical precision. First, he dirtied his hair with a mixture of ash and oil he'd perfected over the years. Then he rubbed dirt under his nails and into the folds of his skin. Finally, he donned the clothes he kept in a separate wardrobe: a worn army jacket, patched trousers, torn shoes bought at Portobello Market. Every detail was studied to make him one of those urban ghosts society prefers not to see. The monthly ritual arose from a tragedy that had tormented him for 25 years. His brother William, brilliant engineer at Rolls-Royce, had lost everything in the '99 economic crisis. Too proud to ask the family for help, he'd slipped into the abyss of the streets. On a January night with freezing temperatures, he'd entered a supermarket to warm up. He was dragged out by force, insulted, humiliated. The next morning, they found him dead in an alley, frozen and bearing obvious signs of beating. Since that day, James had made two solemn vows. First, in his shops, every human being would be treated with dignity, regardless of appearance. Second, he would find those responsible for William's death and make them pay. The disguises served both purposes, allowing him to test his staff's humanity while searching for clues about that cursed night. That morning, the target was the Oxford Street supermarket, the crown jewel of the Harrison chain. 3,000 square meters of gleaming modernity, generating £20 million annually. The manager, Robert Clark, boasted of having London's most professional team. James intended to verify this. Walking through the city centre streets, he adopted the posture of one who apologizes for existing: drooping shoulders, shuffling gait, gaze avoiding contact. Years of observation had taught him that the homeless move like hunted animals, always alert, always ready to be chased away. Crossing the automatic doors of the supermarket, the contrast was brutal. The warm, perfumed air, LED lights making every product shine, background music designed to induce consumption. Customers instinctively moved away, creating a void around him as if poverty were contagious. That's when he saw her, Sophie Bennett, pill number 3. 28 years of artificial perfection. Platinum blonde hair in an impeccable ponytail. Magazine-worthy makeup despite the early hour. Red uniform that seemed painted on her toned body. The name badge gleamed like a mirror. James positioned himself near the fruit section, pretending to look at apples while actually studying Sophie. He immediately noticed the double standard in her behavior. With respectable customers, she was all smiles and witty jokes, efficiency and courtesy. But it sufficed for someone of modest appearance to approach for the mask to fall. She physically recoiled, touched products with her fingertips as if contaminated, ostentatiously cleaned her hands with sanitizer after each suspicious transaction. He watched her humiliate an elderly lady trying to use discount vouchers, loudly proclaiming they were expired and visibly delighting in the woman's embarrassment. When the poor woman realized she didn't have enough money, Sophie drummed her painted nails on the counter, producing a rhythmic sound calculated to increase the humiliation. "Till free!" she shouted over the woman's head, forcing her to gather her shopping and leave with glassy eyes. James's blood boiled. This gratuitous cruelty, this sadistic pleasure in petty power, reminded him too much of the accounts of William's night. He decided it was time. He took a simple loaf and headed towards Sophie's till with deliberately slow steps. He wanted to give her every chance to behave with humanity. He didn't even get close to the conveyor belt. Sophie saw him coming, and her face transformed into a mask of disgust. She rose from her chair, using her own body as a barrier. The scene that followed was theatrical in its cruelty. Sophie burst into sharp, cutting laughter that echoed through the entire supermarket. Drawing the attention of customers and colleagues, she openly insulted him, calling him walking rubbish and accusing him of stinking. When James pulled out a worn wallet containing valid notes, she immediately accused him of stealing them. The security chief, Marcus Thompson, came running. A colossus of 17 stone, former bouncer, new to the job and eager to make a good impression. He grabbed James's arm with brutal force, ready to drag him out. It was at that moment, as Sophie turned to savor the spectacle, that James saw the necklace. The world seemed to stop. A golden pendant in the shape of a lion with small rubies for eyes, identical in every detail to the one their father had given William for his graduation. A unique piece, custom-made by a Hatton Garden jeweler. James saw again his brother stroking that pendant while studying, a nervous gesture he'd maintained for years. How could this necklace be around this cruel girl's neck? He managed to ask Sophie where she'd got it before being dragged away. The girl's reaction was immediate and suspicious. She brought her hand to the pendant protectively, eyes narrowing first with suspicion, then with something resembling fear. She shouted at Marcus to get him out immediately. As he was pushed out with violence, James raised his eyes to the glass office on the second floor. Robert Clark, the manager, was observing the scene. Their gazes met for a long moment. A shadow passed over the man's face. Recognition? Fear? Then he turned abruptly and disappeared into his office. Marcus pushed him onto the wet pavement with such force that James fell, dirtying himself further. Some passers-by moved away in disgust. The guard threatened to call the police if he returned. James rose slowly, continuing his role to the end. But inside, everything had changed. William's necklace around that girl's neck couldn't be a coincidence, and Robert Clark's reaction confirmed even darker suspicions. He limped to an alley where, after ensuring he wasn't followed, he extracted his iPhone from the special hidden pocket. His hands trembled as he dialed his wife Elizabeth's number. He'd found the first real clue in 25 years of searching. But why was that necklace around Sophie Bennett's neck? And what did Robert Clark have to do with all this? The conference room at Harrison headquarters pulsed with tension that evening. 40 regional directors, urgently summoned, murmured nervously among themselves. No one knew the reason for this extraordinary meeting. When James entered still dressed as a homeless man, a shockwave crossed the room. Robert Clark, seated in the front row, turned white as paper. James stared at him for a long time before beginning to speak, recounting his undercover test and the humiliation suffered. But when he mentioned the necklace, the atmosphere in the room became electric. With a controlled voice vibrating with repressed emotion, James told the story of William and his death, a story many knew only partially. Then he dropped the first bomb. The afternoon's research had revealed that Sophie Bennett was the daughter of George Bennett, the manager of the supermarket from which William had been expelled that fateful night 25 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening, but James wasn't finished. Documents in hand, he revealed that Robert Clark had been the deputy security chief that same night, direct accomplice in his brother's murder. The investigations had also discovered that Robert and Sophie had been running a sophisticated embezzlement system for years that had siphoned over £300,000 from the company. The room exploded in controlled chaos when James showed the evidence on a large screen. Photos of secret meetings, falsified documents, testimonies from blackmailed suppliers, a corruption network involving 6 shops in the chain. Robert, under the unbearable pressure of evidence and colleagues' accusing stares, collapsed. With trembling voice, he confessed the unspeakable. George Bennett had torn the necklace from William's body as he lay dying in the alley, keeping it as a trophy of his first great managerial success. He'd then bequeathed it to his daughter, along with a fortune built on corruption. The horror painted on those presents' faces was palpable. Some rose in disgust, others cursed under their breath. James proceeded with surgical coldness, immediate dismissal for Robert, Sophie, and 15 other employees involved in the corruption network. Criminal charges for all. Radical reforms to ensure such atrocities never repeated. But before leaving, in a gesture that surprised everyone, James addressed Robert one last time. He knew the man had a 16-year-old son named William. Cruel irony of fate. He promised to guarantee the boy a full university scholarship. The father's sins shouldn't fall on the son. It's what his brother would have wanted. The beating rain the next morning seemed to reflect the emotional turmoil gripping London after the previous night's revelations. James had been in his office since 6, examining mountains of documents, when his assistant knocked on the door with a perplexed expression. Sophie Bennett insisted on seeing him, claiming it was a matter of life and death. The girl's transformation was shocking. No makeup, hair carelessly tied back, eyes red and swollen from crying. She trembled under her soaked coat, while clutching a yellow envelope, as if her life depended on it. With a voice broken by emotion, Sophie revealed the existence of her father's diary, found after his death 3 years earlier. The yellowed pages contained a truth even more terrible than James had imagined. William Harrison wasn't a simple homeless man fallen from grace. He was an undercover MI5 agent, infiltrated to dismantle a drug trafficking network using supermarkets as distribution centers. The drugs arrived hidden in shipments of tropical products from South America, a multi-million-pound operation involving organized crime. George Bennett's diary revealed every detail of that night. When Robert Clark and his accomplices discovered William's true identity, they didn't call the police. It was the cartel's men who beat him to death in the alley. George had tried to intervene, but Robert had threatened him. If he talked, they'd also kill little Sophie, who was only 3 years old then. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Sophie opened the lion pendant with trembling fingers, revealing a microchip hidden inside. George had kept the necklace not as a trophy, but as life insurance.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The chip contained all the documents from William's investigation: names, dates, transactions, evidence that could still today bring down the entire organization. Sophie confessed that Robert had hired her specifically to keep her under control, knowing she possessed the necklace. She lived in constant terror, forced to play the role of the cynical and cruel cashier to avoid arousing suspicion. Her transformation into a ruthless person had been her armor, the price of survival. James's phone rang urgently. The security chief informed him that Robert Clark and 6 other managers had disappeared overnight. Someone had warned them. The criminal network William had tried to dismantle 25 years ago was still active and dangerous. Sophie begged for protection for herself and her daughter Emma, barely 2 years old. Robert had threatened her explicitly. If she revealed anything, they'd do to the child what they'd done to William. But she could no longer live in the lie, not after discovering who James really was. The following 2 weeks transformed James's elegant office into an operational bunker. MI5 agents worked side by side with private detectives and computer technicians to decrypt the chip's contents. What emerged exceeded worst expectations. The criminal network William had discovered had not only survived but spread like cancer. It now involved dozens of supermarkets in 6 counties, but also luxury restaurants, 5-star hotels, and even some compliant bank branches. An empire of evil built on the blood of a forgotten hero. Sophie, transferred with little Emma to a protected location, provided precious details only an insider could know. She recounted secret meetings disguised as business conventions, codes hidden in accounting documents, veiled threats, and continuous blackmail. The situation precipitated when Sophie received a call on her old phone, the one she'd left in the now empty flat. Robert Clark's voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it even more terrifying. He knew where they were. If she didn't withdraw her testimony within 48 hours, Emma would suffer the same fate as William. But Robert had made a mistake, letting slip a cryptic reference to a never-opened letter, something Harrison should have read 25 years ago. James suddenly remembered. His mother, before dying, had given him a sealed envelope saying William had asked her to give it to him when the time was right. He'd never opened it, thinking they were just farewell words. With trembling hands, James retrieved the letter from his personal safe. William's handwriting was still clear on the yellowed paper. The message was brief but devastating. It indicated the existence of a safety deposit box at the Bank of England, containing evidence the chip couldn't store for space reasons, and a terrible warning. There's someone very high up protecting this network. Someone in the family. Trust no one. The contents of the safety deposit box were like a punch to the stomach. Photographs, recordings, documents showing secret meetings between cartel bosses and Margaret Harrison, James and William's older sister, whom he hadn't seen since William's funeral. Margaret, trustee of the family estate after their father's death, had used company funds to finance drug trafficking. William had discovered it and become a target. His sister had ordered her brother's elimination. The abandoned warehouse in East London looked like something from a film noir. The concrete structure, once a thriving textile factory, now housed only shadows and secrets. In the center of the empty space, lit by industrial lamps, Margaret Harrison waited with the calm of one who holds all the cards. At 60, Margaret was still an imposing presence. Gray hair in a perfect bun, black designer suit, discreet but expensive jewelry. Beside her, Robert Clark and 6 armed men. In a corner, little Emma cried softly, too frightened even to call for her mummy. The meeting between siblings after 25 years of silence was electrically charged. James and Sophie had entered as demanded, apparently alone, while dozens of officers surrounded them, invisible in the darkness. Margaret spoke first, voice cold as steel. She recounted how their father had always favored the sons, leaving her only crumbs of the family empire. How she'd had to build her own fortune by allying with those who had real power. How William had become an obstacle when he discovered everything. The confession flowed with the naturalness of one who feels no remorse. William hadn't been murdered because he was homeless, but because he'd dared defy a system bigger than himself. His death had been a message. No one could stop the machine Margaret had set in motion. Robert presented the deal's terms with an executioner's brutality. James would sign the transfer of all Harrison supermarkets to a series of shell companies. In exchange, Sophie and Emma would survive. As for James himself, a tragic accident was already planned. But the perfect plan had a fatal flaw. From the darkness emerged Elizabeth, James's wife, followed by Detective Inspector Matthews and a team from SO19. The betrayal in Margaret's eyes was total when Elizabeth revealed she'd recorded every conversation of recent weeks, that she'd been the mole who'd enabled the network's dismantling. The arrest was swift and precise. The armed men surrendered without fighting, faced with numerical superiority. Robert attempted a desperate escape, but was tackled. Margaret, for the first time in her life, showed fear as handcuffs closed around her wrists. Sophie ran to embrace Emma, tears mingling in liberating sobs. The child clung to her mother as if never wanting to let go. Elizabeth approached James, revealing the final puzzle piece. She'd never stopped investigating William's death, suspecting the official version hid something. When Margaret had approached her under the pretense of cordiality, she'd smelled deception and begun her own parallel investigation. Love for James and thirst for justice for William had guided her through years of patient evidence gathering. 6 months after the dramatic night of arrests, spring sunshine illuminated the Harrison Villa gardens, transformed for the occasion. This wasn't an ordinary celebration. The William Harrison Foundation for Human Dignity was being officially inaugurated, a project that would forever change the face of social assistance in Britain. 200 guests mingled among elegantly set tables. Former homeless people reintegrated into working life thanks to foundation programs. Harrison supermarket employees who'd embraced the new company philosophy. Institutional representatives, journalists who'd followed the case with civic passion. Sophie Bennett was unrecognizable. The cold, cruel girl of 6 months ago had transformed into a woman of authentic beauty, no longer hidden behind masks of makeup and cynicism. As director of the company's social program, she coordinated initiatives for the neediest with competence and passion. Beside her, little Emma, now 4 years old, played serenely with other children, finally free from the shadow of fear. The trial that had shaken Britain had brought extraordinary results. Margaret Harrison, sentenced to life imprisonment, had yielded only on the last day. Collapsing in tears and admitting greed had transformed her into a monster she no longer recognized. Robert Clark, sentenced to 30 years, had provided names and details that had allowed the complete dismantling of the criminal network. 47 arrests, seizure of assets worth over £100 million, liberation of dozens of companies from criminality's yoke. But the real revolution had occurred within the Harrison empire. James hadn't limited himself to purging the corrupt. He'd rethought the entire company philosophy. Each supermarket now housed the William Refuge, welcoming spaces where anyone could find shelter, hot drinks, dignified sanitary facilities, and, above all, respect. Employees followed innovative training programs on empathy and welcome, often led by former homeless people who told their stories. The job insertion program was incredible. 30% of new hires came from marginalized situations. Ex-prisoners, homeless people, immigrants, disabled people found in Harrison supermarkets not just a job, but a family. The results spoke for themselves. These employees were the most motivated, kindest to customers, most loyal to the company. During the ceremony, a bronze statue was unveiled that would be replicated at every supermarket entrance. 2 figures, one helping the other rise, faces deliberately undefined so they could represent anyone. At the base, a plaque with a simple but powerful phrase, "Human dignity is priceless," in memory of William Harrison. The most moving moment came when William Jr., Robert Clark's 17-year-old son, took the stage. The boy had legally changed his surname to Harrison, publicly repudiating his father, but embracing the moral legacy of the man he'd helped murder. James placed William's necklace around his neck, now a symbol of redemption rather than death, in a passing of the torch that moved all present. Elizabeth took the floor for the day's final toast, recalling how William's love and sacrifice continued living in every gesture of kindness, every outstretched hand, every gaze that saw the person beyond appearance. The Harrison model was spreading throughout Europe, with other companies adopting similar policies. As the sun set, tinting the sky pink and gold, little Emma approached James, asking him to tell her Uncle William's story again. And as James began to narrate, all present drew near in a spontaneous circle. For some stories must be told and retold, so evil never prevails, and love always triumphs. A year later, entering the Oxford Street supermarket, customers found a completely transformed environment, not just physically, with the William Refuge always bustling and welcoming, but spiritually. Employees smiled sincerely, helped with genuine care, saw in every customer a person deserving respect. The plaque at the entrance read, "In memory of William Harrison, 1972-1999, engineer, hero, brother. True greatness is measured by how we treat those who can give us nothing in return." And every Tuesday, mysteriously, fresh flower bouquets appeared beneath that plaque, brought by anonymous but grateful hands. William's legacy lived in thousands of small daily gestures, in a cashier's smile to an elderly person counting pennies, in a security guard's help to a homeless person seeking shelter, in a manager's respect for the humblest of their employees. The kindness revolution had begun in a London supermarket, but it was changing the world, one person at a time. For in the end, this was the most precious lesson. Every human being deserves dignity and respect. Appearances always deceive. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are those the world doesn't see. And love, true love, never dies. It transforms, multiplies, creates families where there were none, transforms pain into hope and injustice into redemption. If this story has touched your heart and shown you that every person deserves respect, regardless of appearance, give a like with all your emotion. Kindness can change the world, one gesture at a time. Share to spread this powerful message. Never judge by appearances, for behind every face lies a story we don't know. Subscribe now for more incredible stories of justice, redemption, and the transformative power of human compassion. Together, we can build a world where human dignity is priceless.